All right, so James, you've done so many, and I really, when I reached out to you, I don't want to rehash because you've done that a lot, even recently on Jimmy Fallon and all the
Yeah.
other interviews I've heard you do. So let's spin this forward. Do you think? In fact, I heard you say something, and it might have been with Wertheim, that was really struck me, where you said if you don't think without the protests and the intensity of the protests in the aftermath of George Floyd, that an arrest wouldn't have happened that fast.
Yeah.
So now we're several weeks after this. Is that a good sign? Are you seeing this as a good sign that this particular time may lead to some significant change?
I do. And I think I talked to Worth. I talked to a few people about just the roller coaster it's been since the George Floyd incident. So the day it happened, all your thoughts are with the family, the tragedy, the concern over the people that loved him and knew him. And then you wonder if this is just going to be another statistic, another case where it's forgotten quickly. And then I've been extremely encouraged by the fact that protesters are still going strong, still have this idea that they're going to create change. And I really believe that, no, I don't think those officers would have been charged. I don't think they'd be in jail right now. I don't know if the officers in Atlanta would have been charged. The officers in Atlanta before that attacked protesters would have been fired immediately. I just don't know if all those things that we're seeing a more of a rise in accountability. I mean, I still think there's plenty more to be done, but there is a rise in accountability for police officers, and I think that's a positive step. And I do think the protests have had an impact, and I'm really encouraged that so there's the looting and the rioting that kind of hijacked the story for a couple of days. And I think that was awful. That was tragic. Businesses were destroyed. Property was destroyed. I think that's awful, but I don't think that's the same protesters that are still going strong, the ones that had the right intentions in the first place. And, that the fact that they've carried on and through all that, I mean, through looters and rioters sort of almost trying to like undermine it and trying to take the attention away. I think they've stayed strong and stayed through it, and I'm really happy that and encouraged that there is progress being made. There've been sweeping reforms so far. They're still trickling in, but there've been 50A in New York, which is the statute that can sort of shield police officers' records. That's getting taken away. That's getting repealed. Breonna's law in Kentucky. They're going to put things on the ballot. They're going to put measures on the ballot in November, I think, for banning chokeholds. So I think that this progress wouldn't have happened if everyone did really just let this go. If everyone was so numb that this happened and people just said, "Oh, that's a tragedy," and we're going to move on. Now they're not moving on. They're saying this is the time to start taking action.
You outlined that perfectly, James, because I think it's almost 4 years now since Kaepernick,
Mm-hmm.
whose message was exactly this. But and we obviously shouldn't have to have death to cause this.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what I'm saying. I sense the same thing in everybody can see who I am and where I'm in life. From my viewpoint, I see the traction. That's what I'm saying. You just outlined it.
Yeah, and it feels like there's different momentum right now, and like you said, it's sad that it had to take this kind of a tragedy for it to gain this traction. And I don't know if it's the graphic nature of what we saw, the 8 minutes and 46 seconds, that just displays the cold-heartedness of it, the almost like devious plotting to do that, and ruthless behavior of this specific police officer. Or if it's the fact that everyone's been home for so long and there is no sports. I mean, sports has always been a bit of a distraction. It's something that's so popular in all of American culture. And it's a way of, in my opinion, keeping people happy and they're entertained. So maybe they can take their mind off of more serious topics. And right now, there's nothing like that to distract. So it's these topics are at the forefront, and people are saying, you know what, now is the time to act, and they're not going to just be distracted by a lot of other things.
Yeah, you raised a point there, James, that I think there'll be some sociologists who will study this over subsequent years, is that very point, because of the timing that America has been in a word pent up, right? All of us, and with no release, very little entertainment, no sport. And did that contribute to the ferocity, the intensity of the reaction to what we all saw was an inhuman act?
Yeah.
It was.
Yeah. And I'm definitely not a sociologist. I took my
Yeah.
intro in college, but that's about it. But I agree.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the entire reason or a big part of it or how much of a part of it, but definitely people being home and being more aware. I think, right now people are watching the news a lot more or following the news a lot more, however they're going to consume that. And so they're more ready for action since they're not maybe at work, they're not taking trips, they're not traveling, they're not going to movies. So they've got this time to learn, and I'm so also encouraged at how many people are taking this time to educate themselves on topics that they may not have cared about or may not have heard about previously. And there's so many people. I mean, I think a lot more people knew what Juneteenth was this year than in
Yeah.
previous years. A lot more people were paying attention to some of the historical monuments, to some of the just in general the history of the Black and brown community.
Yeah. Um, it's funny. I think you touched on this a little bit in this brilliant book that you wrote, Ways of Grace. But we saw it in Minneapolis. Is this and the power of this?
Yeah.
And even though body cam is now being worn by officers, it's taken this to really provide the accountability that you mentioned.
Yeah, it is. And it's really amazing how many people. So like when what happened to me in 2015 happened, I believe 100% if there wasn't a video, it would have been totally different. It would have been gone from the news quickly. It would have been my word against 5 police officers. And as much as I am a credible source and people want to believe me, it's 5 police officers that are gonna say nothing happened. And one guy who's saying, no, wait a minute, they tackled me. I wasn't doing anything wrong. They were holding me in cuffs for 10 or 15 minutes. And a lot of people saying, oh, that's not believable. The cops wouldn't do that. And I think for the last 20 or 30 years, often that's been the case. And there's always, not always, but often there's a way to say, well, this victim, you're not really sure because they've got a criminal record, or they were standing outside of a liquor store at 2 a.m. So do you really believe them? Or they were intoxicated or something. So there's always a way to say, no, the cops knew what they were doing. They did it right. And now with video and enough people just videoing it and seeing exactly what happened, you're realizing, like, you know what, sometimes these reports that the police put in are a little biased and they're a little skewed the way that they want to make themselves look good instead of the actual truth being told. So I think with the video, people are, when it happened to me, I had so many people say, I can't believe this is still happening. I can't believe this is happening now.
Yeah.
That was 2015. And it's almost as if they were awakened, especially people close to me, because they felt like I was almost isolated in a bubble. I do have some money, I have some fame, so this kind of stuff doesn't happen. And people were then woken up to the fact that when you leave that bubble, when I leave the tennis courts, I'm still just a black man standing on a corner. I'm still in a different community than the tennis community. So for people to realize that, it took a video. I think it took them seeing that this kind of stuff does happen, and they're wondering, I can't believe, is it getting worse now? And I think a lot of people in the Black and brown community are not laughing because it's not a laughing matter, but almost saying, like, it took this for you to realize that we've been telling the truth these last 20 or 30 years, that this has been going on, and it's been dangerous. It's been an epidemic. And now, because we can see it, it has completely changed to people, to everyone realizing. And I think, to go back to the momentum, I think that's also what's fueling the momentum, is now it's not just one somewhat marginalized community that's screaming about this, because Kaepernick 4 years ago was screaming about something that the Black and brown community has been screaming and yelling and making a big deal about for years. And now the momentum has changed because the majority has taken it upon themselves to realize that this is a problem and to make it more of a cause for them. And that's what's helped for so long. I mean, there's so many ways where we can talk about the correlation with sports too, but Jackie Robinson may not have happened the same way. He desegregated baseball without Branch Rickey. Althea Gibson may not have won Wimbledon if it wasn't for Alice Marble. Someone, a white person speaking up or taking a stand and helping in the cause of a minority community.
Yeah. You wrote something in your book that struck me as I was listening to you there. You talked about how when you took your first public stand following your 2015 incident, you said you lost some friends.
Oh, yeah.
Any of them reach out to you after this and come back?
No, I think those have been somewhat fractured permanently. But
okay.
But what I have been encouraged about since this incident, since the George Floyd incident, I've spoken out quite a bit about it. As you said, I've been talking a lot. People probably want to shut me up by now, but no, I've been talking a lot, and I've been amazed at how many people that are my friends are calling to listen. They're calling to say, hey, what do you think about this? What can I do to learn? What can I do to help? Do you mind helping me in talking to some of my friends? Do you mind helping me in talking to my kids? All this kind of stuff about what's going on in this country right now and what we've missed and what we haven't been paying attention to. And it's incredibly encouraging. Yeah, back when it happened in 2015 and I spoke out, I lost some friends. I definitely had people saying that I was against the cops. I was just using race. I was just being a tool, all this kind of stuff that people were saying then. And I tried not to let that bother me. Of course, you're going to think, oh, that's, it's too bad. But you think about, were those really friends to begin with? Are those the people you want to be in your life that are going to make your life better? And then you think about the ways that you could try to educate some people about things. And there just comes a point where you wonder who wants to hear this. And now it seems like so many more people are wanting to hear another side of the story than they've heard most of their lives. And that is extremely encouraging to me.
Oh, that's great. I do want to, because I'm not going to monopolize your time, I promise, but I actually do want to ask you about an incident. We've talked about this off the air,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a match that goes back quite a while at the U.S. Open. And you're playing Leighton Hewitt, and I was calling the match. And I didn't look the year up, but I'm going to guess it's somewhere in the early 2000s. It might be 2000
That was
somewhere.
2001, I think. That was the year Leighton won it.
And there was an incident. I think it was at Armstrong, but anyway, Leighton Hewitt it was obvious. I was calling the match, and I could hear it. I could tell what was happening, and it was clearly a racially motivated comment that Leighton Hewitt made concerning a line judge in a match against you.
Yeah.
And so I've read this, reading this incredible book you wrote, Ways of Grace, homage to Arthur Ashe, and talking about activism. How did you, in the moment when you're a young player on the rise with a promising professional career, how did you handle that in that moment?
Yeah, that was there. It'd be interesting to see if that were to happen today, how the reaction would have been. For one, because the cameras would have been even up closer, and the high def would have made it even more obvious. But at the time, so I remember having a conversation with my dad, and he said, I'm going to support you, whatever you want to do. So he was on board if I was going to really go after him.
So this is obviously after the match you did this.
Yeah, after the match. So during the match, I will say that it was just, it went by and it was the blink of an eye, and I moved on, and I was trying to win that match. Because like I said, I was an up-and-comer. He was, I think, the third seed. He ended up winning the tournament that year, but I was, it was a fifth set. It was a 5-set match. It was very close, and that's part of the reason he was so frustrated, because a young up-and-comer was possibly going to beat him, and we were in a very close match, and he wanted to win. So that's not surprising. And so right after the match, I just said, I think Patrick McEnroe came out and interviewed me, and I said, you know what, it was the heat of the moment. I don't know. I want to get his take. And so same thing. And when I told my dad that, I said, I'm going to go into the press conference, and I'm going to let him speak to me. I'm going to talk to him about it and see what's really going on and what he meant and what he was saying. Because it was in the heat of the battle, and it was, if I misheard or anything, I was going to get to the bottom of it. So I definitely kind of let him off the hook there. And then I spoke to him the next day. I went into the locker room and I said, Leighton, we need to have a conversation. And we talked about it. And he said, no, it was not that at all. It was just that it was the same lines person. And I was just frustrated by that and all this kind of stuff. And I said, okay, well, I pretty much said it happens once. One time I can say, I can believe you, it's a mistake. If it happens again, then it's not a mistake. And then I'm not taking the same road. I'm not dealing with this with the press and saying you're everything was okay and everything is fine. It's going to be a lot more vocal that I'm going to be. And he said, okay, we're fine. Definitely no. And we never had an incident after that. We never had, we played quite a few times. We were totally fine. We definitely weren't the best of friends on tour, but that's normal. There's plenty of guys out there that you're just acquaintances with. And that's how it was with Leighton and I, and we were fine. But he didn't have another incident, but that one was definitely, for him to deny it or anyone to deny that it was racially charged is, it's almost, it's blind. You saw what he said and everyone saw what he said. He compared the lines person to me and saying, what do they have in common? And, it's unfortunate it's another thing that people are talking about now is white privilege, like people realizing that they are privileged and it's not that they've gotten things handed to them. It's just they've never had things taken away. They've never had their color, the color of their skin, be an obstacle that they've had to overcome. And if people that have never had that as an obstacle then realize that, okay, a black person is getting something that maybe this white person didn't get, and it's only trying to get to equality. It's not like we've progressed past the white majority, but it seems like it's unfair because they're so used to getting something. And for him, he was upset that a call went against him and has to blame it on the fact that the umpire is the same color as me, as if I'm getting special treatment because I'm black, as opposed to the treatment that's been going on for decades and generations that has been an obstacle for us to get over.
Yeah. I want to come back to the privilege question in a moment, but as we're talking about this, and I'm thinking again, because we've discussed in private times, Kaepernick, you've had some connection to him. I saw it firsthand and lived through it every day. Yeah. And now 4 years later, the moment that you confronted with Hewitt, and again, you're a young guy on the rise, and Kaepernick, you know, it's astounding when you can sit there and see with clarity. He put his professional career on the line. Yeah. When he made his decisions in 2016.
Yeah, it's really incredible what he did. And I know how close you are to the situation, being there and calling all those games, and seeing the reaction from the fans, the reaction from the players, and to take that kind of a stand at a young age. I mean, I think people they look to athletes as role models, which is incredible. And a lot of them take that job very seriously. A lot of them do an excellent job of handling that with kids, with fans and stuff. Sometimes it's forgotten that these are young people. I mean, especially in tennis, you got stars at 18, 19, 20 years old. In football, they're mid-20s. And a lot of people, if they were judged entirely on what they were doing in their mid-20s, since it's not public, it may not be their perfect self. And so for someone like Kaepernick in his 20s to take this kind of a stand, it's something that, in my opinion, he should be extremely proud of. And it's a huge chance because there is a lot of life left to live. And I remember hearing that a lot of times from veterans, from coaches, from people that, you know, your tennis career is so long, but you've got a long life to live after that. So try to make sure that those bonds are still there. You make friendships, you have a lot of things in line, your finances, all the kind of things, your health is going to still be important for after your career. And so Kaepernick made a decision in the middle of his career that's going to affect the rest of his life, not just the rest of his career, but the rest of his life. And that's a huge decision he made, huge financial decision he made. And for him to stand up for it, I think Brett Favre just a couple of days ago came out and said that he's going to be looked at as a hero. And that's something that 4 years ago, if Brett Favre had said that, he would have been, tossed aside, by social media, by everyone in the mainstream media. Everyone would have said he's crazy. There's no way. And I had those conversations with people back then as well, and saying, what he's doing is incredible. And I'm honestly saying, I don't know if I would have been strong enough to do that. And I would like to think so, but I really don't know. And I think a lot of people, if they want to look in the mirror and be honest with themselves, I don't know if a lot of people would be willing to do that, will be willing to take that kind of a chance with their career.
Yeah, I think you hit it there, James. And I just, again, I'm one of those people that with time and in the moment, there was that collision of message and delivery. Yeah. Right. The delivery platform. That was the biggest conflict. The message now seems so right and so much clearer. And again, it shouldn't take death for this to happen. That's obviously understood. But the result is that you're saying he is going to be, this is a guy that if you write another update to this book in 20 years, his picture is going to be on the cover with Billie Jean and Arthur and Martina and these other great activists. Yeah. He was already there on the cover, but he'll be front and center for sure. And he's he's done. And I think that's important to think about is with the message. His message was always about police brutality, police violence against the African American community, and people were so upset about the way he did it because it was during the anthem. And it's so interesting now to see that the protesting and then there's the rioting and the looting and everything, and saying, well, this can't be the answer. This isn't the answer. Well, I agree that's not the answer. Looting, rioting is never the answer. But when there's so much pain inflicted that there will sometimes be backlash, this is the backlash as opposed to a peaceful demonstration.
that, and then the people are still not going to be happy because the status quo is always going to be appreciated by the people that are already in power. So the NFL owners they have a great thing going. The NFL commissioner has a great thing going. They're making, boatloads of money. They're selling this sport. They're not the ones that are putting their bodies on the line every day either. And they're making all this money. So they want to keep the status quo the way it is. And so that's why I think for him to shake that up, he knew that he was going to be upsetting those people that want to keep the status quo. They want things going exactly as they've been going. They want things just focused on the product, the play on the field. That's it. Going to the playoffs, Super Bowls, keep making that money. And for him to possibly disrupt that is obviously going to upset them. So he knew that going into it. And that's why it took quite a bit of courage. And that's why I also think these people that are demonstrating, that are protesting, they need to understand that this is having an effect right now. It's helping with police reform. That's incredible. And the next best opportunity to have that kind of political power is to recognize who benefits from the status quo. These police commissioners, the police unions that are keeping things going with status quo, they're the ones that are benefiting, and they want to keep it the same. So the next best opportunity is in November, when you can vote and try to vote for people that actually believe in the way you believe and that can make a difference and aren't just going to try to keep the same things happening over and over. Because as we've done that, we've seen that, because of the cell phone, we can actually have accounts of what's going on, but we're still not doing much about it. We're not actually having that accountability. It's starting to happen now. And so we need people that are going to continue that process and that progress. And November is the next chance. And I know there's going to be hurdles to vote in November for a lot of people. We saw it in Kentucky recently, where they've closed 95% of the polls in one of the majority African-American communities. And so it's going to take hours of waiting sometimes. It's going to take finding a way to vote by mail, whatever it takes. I mean, I think people need to recognize that's the next power that we have.
It shocked me the other night. 60 Minutes had the police chief of Minneapolis on. It was a Black American who once was involved in a suit against the Minneapolis Police Department for improper. He's the chief.
It's crazy.
Now, Minneapolis is a city that I lived in for 8 years, and I'm saddened to see what had happened. Larry Fitzgerald grew up there, and he wrote a great piece about this is not the Minneapolis that he knew growing up. So this has clearly gone off the rails. But the point I'm going to make is you, I think, probably confronted this in New York. What the police chief in Minneapolis said on 60 Minutes was basically pointed at the union, and the union chief, who has pretty much not even dog whistle, he's pretty much been open in his views about the racial dynamic in Minneapolis. And he said that's the hurdle right now. And that's just that's jarring that the union protection would extend to that level.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not a sociologist. I'm not a lawyer that can figure out the dynamics of the union. But I mean, I am realistic. I am intelligent enough to know that the unions have too much power. These unions are making it so that the cops have to abide by whatever they're going to say. And these unions have political power. I don't understand how it's fair, how we can't have common sense legislation where the police unions can't donate millions of dollars to a district attorney and then get the district attorney they want in power. That once they get in power, they're going to say, you know what, we're going to take it a little easy on these police officers because the union has paid us so much money. I mean, these are 1 + 1 = 2 kind of situations that you can see that are in your face, obvious. And with the unions having this much power, it makes it so difficult this is why we talk about, like, there's the good cops, there's the bad cops, you get rid of the bad apples. But you know what, the good cops have a tough time speaking up, because if they speak up and they're punished by the union, these unions just have too much power and make it so that it's uncomfortable for any good cop to do his job the right way. And if you're going to do that, you're perpetuating a system that is broken. So if the system is broken, let's start with how we fix it. And the first step, to me, one of the first steps is these police unions. They have to be broken up, or they have to be completely redone.
All right, home stretch, promise. You used the word white privilege, which I thought was great, because I think, just as I watched this with Cap 4 years ago, where actions can be misunderstood, so can words. And I think we've had to learn that when you say white privilege, it's not material privilege. It's this privilege.
Yeah.
And what I want to say was, I heard Nate Burleson, the former NFL receiver who's now on television. He said this. I listened to him last week, and he had a great line. He said, "What the phrase Black Lives Matter, because some people have come back with the All Lives Matter retort." He said that's not the point. The point is we're saying is that Black Lives Matter too.
Yeah.
And I thought that was great. That's something we all need to understand.
Yeah, because the All Lives Matter, in conjunction with the white privilege, is that we've always understood that all lives matter. We've written laws into the books for that, for murder, for homicide, for everything that we do, and we prosecute when it is a white person. We have huge media stories when it's a white person that's in trouble, that gets victimized. But the fact that it's so much different when it's a Black person, that when they're killed, when there's a marginalized community that's taken advantage of, they don't have the same rules in place. And when you're punished differently, when the same crime happens and a Black person gets their sentence is 3 times more strict than a white person, when the same crime happens and they're only prosecuted they're half as often when you're white as when you're Black. So, when there's different sets of rules, and like you said, there's things that are misunderstood, there's communications that are difficult, and every Black person knows if they're dealing with the cops, they have to be on their best behavior. It's you're starting on thin ice. You're starting with yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am, and that's the only way you can handle it. As opposed to when you're white, you're not nervous. And I mean, it becomes apparent when I went to a very predominantly white high school, and if a party was ever broken up, kids are at parties and it's 95% white, and the cops show up, you should be nervous. There are kids there that are underage drinking, and the white kids would be perfectly fine, content, talking to the officer, no big deal. And if that was in any sort of a Black neighborhood, they're scared. And I was scared in those situations, which is why I didn't frequent them that often. And that's why my dad had my early curfew. I had to be home very early, just for those kind of reasons specifically. But there's just different sets of rules, and it's amazing now people are realizing that. People are realizing, because for so long the Black and brown community didn't want to complain about this. They didn't want to always feel like, oh, we're just piling on. This is such a tough thing. It's such a tough situation. And I'm now dealing with, like I said, I've had friends reach out now, and they want to hear those stories. They want to hear how many times I got pulled over when I was young and have dreads and driving a nice car. They want to hear how many times I got followed in a store, how many times I was told, how expensive that bag is, or how expensive that watch is, and are you sure you want to buy that? And how many times that's a punchline in a movie, but how often it happens and how dehumanizing that can be. That no matter what, if I'm young and I'm in a nice store, they expect that I can't afford it. Or how many times, or how I had a neighbor come over when I'm building a nice house in Connecticut, and the neighbor says, "Oh, I assumed you were a drug dealer." I mean, not even as if it is something that's racist, or not even as if it's a question. It's just, he assumed I was a drug dealer because I was building a nice house in Connecticut. And that's, it's almost so smacking you in the face, racist, that they don't see it. And there's so many people that are now learning, okay, wait a minute, these things happen over and over and over again. It is going to have an effect, and you don't want to complain about every single one of them. That story I told to my wife, and I probably didn't tell to anyone else, because it just happens on a daily basis. So why am I going to let you know that? And it's sort of the philosophy or the theory of death by 1,000 cuts. I mean, you just keep having that happen. You keep having that happen, and you start realizing the way a lot of people look at you, that's the first thing they see is the color of your skin, and assumptions that are made because of that. And those are stereotypes and racial biases. And, that people are now understanding that happens every day. And they may have some that they didn't even realize they had, is again encouraging, because the white privilege is out there, and people are starting to understand that it doesn't mean everyone is born with a silver spoon in their mouth. Every white person isn't born with a trust fund or anything, but they're born without the obstacles that they're going to face of, if I succeed, this is a glass ceiling. This is a hurdle I have to get over at any level of success, because I'm Black, because people don't want to believe that there's just value, and there's intelligence, and there's passion, and there's charisma, and there's there's resourcefulness in these young Black men and women that are having success.
Listening to you, James, is unbelievable, because again, the book, promote the Blake Scholarship Fund. Okay, go find Ways of Grace.
Thank you.
And Arthur's words in there, you basically use what you have, right?
Yeah.
Do what you can, use what you have. And in the last few months, listening to you, you are very comfortable in your skin as an activist. It's very impressive.
Well, thank you, Ted. I appreciate it. And I'm just, as I talked about in the book, I'm sort of an accidental activist. And when I got thrown into it, it's like Arthur said, is use what you have, do what you can. And before what happened to me in 2015, I think a lot of people may not have had any reason to listen to me, except for the fact that I am of mixed race, black, seen by most people as black in a very white sport. And so now, using what's happened to me, that's what I have now, is I can talk about it and I can hopefully use it for a positive. And I my friends always joke about that. I'm an optimistic, and I try to find a silver lining in just about everything. And right now, a terrible situation that happened to me in 2015, I find a way to try to make something positive out of it. And I'm now continuing to do that. And that's part of the reason for the book. And that's part of the reason for me speaking out as much as I am now. And thanks for letting me do it, Ted. It's always fun talking to you. And we've had, like you said, we've had these conversations off air about Kaepernick, and it's really interesting to hear your thoughts on it, being so close to him, being so close to the team. And it's just awesome that people like you are doing what you can to let others talk about this too.
Yeah. Well, we'll finish here because I haven't talked to Colin in 4 or 5 years now, but those who know him very well inside believe he's happier now in the role that he's holding in life than as a quarterback, that he feels the important thing. And now you finished your career as a player, so it's a different story in that regard, but I sense the same thing. You're happy with doing what you're doing.
I'm optimistic, so I'm happy with pretty much what comes my way. I'll be happier if this momentum does continue, it follows through to November, it follows through to the next year, and it doesn't fizzle out. And this momentum brings real actual change, which it's already starting to. And I love that. I love the fact that the changes are being made. That I saw Coco Gauff's speech about why am I still talking about this, and this is for my kids and my grandkids. And I mean, on a side note, she's the most poised 16-year-old I've ever seen in my life, and absolutely going to be a superstar on the court, but off the court, she's absolutely incredible for the way she holds herself, and her parents should be very proud, and she should be very proud. But my point being is, if I can have some sort of an effect, even a tiniest of effect, and that makes it better for my kids when they grow up and for their kids when they grow up, then I'll definitely feel very happy, because I know, I'm a realist, and my forehand was pretty good, but my career in general is not going to have that kind of effect on the history of the game or the history of really anything. But hopefully, if what I'm doing now can have a little bit of an effect, I can definitely feel like I've done something with the voice I got from having a pretty good forehand.
We're all